Israel's most prominent right-wing leader says the era of a Palestinian state is over. I'll ask the controversial Education Minister Naftali Bennett how he plans to end the conflict in the Middle East. I'm Mehdi Hassan, also on the show. Famine, civil war, and maybe even genocide. I'll ask the woman known as the mother of South Sudan, the world's youngest country, whether it was a mistake to declare independence. But first, he's been called the face of Israel's new right wing. Former settler leader turned government minister Naftali Bennett opposes a two-state solution and says Israel should just annex up to 60% of the occupied West Bank in defiance of international law. With Donald Trump saying he doesn't mind if there's a one-state or a two-state solution, is the Israeli hard right now in the ascendancy? This week's headliner from Jerusalem, Israeli Education Minister Naftali Bennett. Naftali Bennett, thanks for joining me on UpFront. You said the election of Donald Trump is an opportunity for Israel because the era of a Palestinian state is over. President Trump said last week he doesn't mind the idea of a one-state rather than a two-state solution. Is that your view too?
Well, there already exist two states for the Palestinians. One in Gaza, a full-blown state run by Hamas, and the other is Jordan, where 70% of the citizens are indeed Palestinians. So the discussion is whether we need a third Palestinian state smack in the heart of Israel, and the answer is no. We need to strengthen Israel and create regional peace based on a common interest, which is to fight against radical Iran, which is out to create a hegemony in the region.
Well, of course, no one in the world agrees with you that Gaza and Jordan are Palestinian states. In fact, the United Nations says Gaza is still officially occupied by Israel. But let's just focus on this one state that does exist right now in that area, specifically the state of Israel, which you're a minister of, representative of. Isn't the real question that if there is just one state left standing in that particular patch of land, should it be a state in which Jews and Palestinians live side by side as equal citizens, or should it be a state in which Jewish citizens are privileged over Palestinian citizens, while millions of other Palestinians remain under occupation without a right to self-determination?
Well, first of all, I beg to differ. In Gaza, we did everything by the book. We pulled back to the 67 lines, pulled out our military, pulled out and expelled our people, and handed it over to Abu Mazen. They today have a state there. They decided to shoot tens of thousands of rockets on Israelis, and we fight back. Israel will not tolerate terror states. Likewise in Jordan, 70% of Jordanians, while you dispute that, that's a fact, or you don't like it, but that's a fact. Regarding Israel, Israel is perhaps the only true democracy in the Middle East where we have about 1.8 million Arabs, including a Supreme Court justice, including 13 Arab members of Knesset. I don't see any Jewish members of Knesset in any Arab Muslim countries. So
just on that point,
Israel, we have a full, vibrant democracy which will
on the democratic point, Israel is a democracy, of course, for some people. Of course, Israel also rules over 3 million Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. For 40 years, you've ruled over millions of people who have no vote whatsoever to control their lives. How are you democratic when you're not giving them a vote? And I believe your plan now is to annex a chunk of the West Bank, I think 60% of the West Bank. That's how you want to supposedly end the conflict. And yet you'll leave millions of people again without a state, without self-determination, without a government of their own, without nationhood.
You should do your homework. We've been there 50 years, not 40 years. They do vote. They vote for the Palestinian parliament. They voted in 2006. Abu Mazen decided not to hold more elections. You should probably ask him about democracy and how democracy should be. But they have their own flag, their own anthem. Yes, it's less than a state because we're not about to commit suicide, but they do have self-determination. Not everyone in the world who wants a state gets one. The Kurds, for example, don't have a state. They want one. The Basques want a state. They don't have one. The Palestinians have two states. They will not get a third one in the heart of our country.
You're right about that. It is coming up to a much longer period. It's the longest military occupation in the world. Thanks for reminding me of that. In terms of peace plans, you've said on record, quote, just wishing a plan doesn't make it real. But isn't that exactly what you do when you wish for a solution? 60% of the West Bank annexed by Israel in violation of international law. That's wishing a plan that will never happen. The Palestinians will never agree to that. They haven't agreed to occupation all these decades. They've been resisting occupation all these decades. Why would they change now, especially when Israel is increasingly isolated on the issue of occupation?
You've got a mistake. We're not isolated at all. Israel's commerce and export has tripled itself over the past 12 years. BDS started in 2005, the supposed BDS. We've tripled our commerce. We've got a 6% growth, the biggest high-tech in the world.
15
after
countries
Silicon
in the Security
Valley.
Council just passed a resolution. 14
if-
of them voted against you, and America abstained. Not a single country voted with you. The EU, the UN, the Russians, the Chinese, the US, they all view this as an illegal occupation and illegal settlements. You are completely isolated on the issue of occupation and settlements. You know that, Naftali.
No, quite the contrary. I think we've had endless Security Council resolutions against Israel, but Israel continues to be the strongest and growing force in the Middle East. If I were the Arabs, I'd focus on finding a way to work together with Israel against Iran, Hezbollah, who seem to be taking over much of the Middle East. If the Arab countries, the Sunnite countries, don't want to be butchered by their Shiite neighbor, they ought to cooperate with us. This is a mutual interest.
Okay.
We need to work together against the big menace. We're not about, let me be very clear there.
Hold on.
Madi, we are not going to give up our tiny piece of land. It's not going to happen, so get on with it.
Okay, so rather than play kind of divide and rule where you turn Sunnis against Shias and vice versa, let me ask you about what Israel is doing. I had senior spokesman for Hamas, Osama Hamdan, on this show a few weeks ago, and he actually said basically his organization will be willing to live with a Palestinian state in the West Bank alongside Israel. You say a flat no to that, which means you're basically more uncompromising now, more extreme than Hamas is. The Israeli government has a more extreme position than Hamas. Wow.
Well, Hamas has proven what happens when we give even a centimeter of land to Arabs. They shoot missiles at us. We left Gaza. We handed it over to Abu Mazen.
You didn't leave Gaza.
Hamas took
Come on.
over.
You control the airspace. You control the territorial waters. You control the borders. You control the population register. Is that what you call leaving?
Absolutely not. Again, you need to do your homework. We left. The moment they started shooting
do you not
rockets
control
at
the
us,
airspace?
yes, we defend ourselves.
Do you not control the airspace and territorial waters? Do you not? Is that incorrect?
The moment we left Gaza,
I'll take that as a
we handed over the keys to them. We did not seek to control of anything. But make no mistake, Israel will always defend itself against terrorist neighbors. Now, it turns out that every time you give Muslim Arabs a chunk of Israel's land, they turn it into a terror base. We're not going to let that happen. Now, I served in the Israeli military as a major in a commando unit. I lost friends. There's no one wants peace more than me, but peace will be achieved by strength, not by carving out our tiny country and handing it over to our enemies.
You're not carving out your own country. You're withdrawing from occupied territories, which everyone in the world, including Israel's own Supreme Court, regards as occupied territory. That's the problem. You can't carve out stuff that's not your own.
Madi, I guess what you need to do is go back and change the Bible. You need to change the narrative of the Bible because it's all there. And I assume
is Israel a theocracy?
all Muslims,
is
Christians,
Israel now a theocracy?
and
Is
Jews.
it a religious state?
I assume.
Why are you quoting the Bible to me? I'm quoting the Supreme
Christians,
Court
Muslims,
of
and
your
Jews.
country. Hold on, the Supreme Court of your country.
Let me finish.
Let me just put the quote of the Supreme Court to you and then you respond.
You're finding
the Judea and Samaria areas are held by the state of Israel in belligerent occupation. That is the view of the Supreme Court of your country. Are you saying the Bible trumps your Supreme Court? Is Israel now a theocracy?
Let me finish. Billions of Muslims and Christians believe in the Bible. I assume, including yourself, I don't know. If you want to say that our land does not belong to us, I suggest you go change the Bible first, come back and then show me a new Bible that says that the land of Israel doesn't belong to Jews.
Okay, so
now, if it's very convenient for you to sort of shove that away, that's fine.
I'm not shoving anyway. You've made your religious education point.
You're right.
Yeah. Go on.
Okay, thank you. Regarding the Supreme Court in Israel, that's a political decision. It's true that in 1967 we released Judea and Samaria from an occupied status of Jordan. Jordan never owned Judea and Samaria. And Madi, I don't know if you know, but there never was a Palestinian state. So you can't occupy something that never was a state.
With respect,
it was held.
I'm quoting
by
the Supreme Court
British,
of your country.
and we and today.
And it's not a political decision.
And what the Supreme Court of our country is saying...
A Supreme Court gives a decision. It's not a political decision. It's a judicial decision, unless they're so-called judges in your view, as Donald Trump views judges. Maybe that's how you view judges.
The Supreme Court is waiting for the government of Israel to decide what is the future. And today, the areas are disputed areas. I understand that the Palestinians want a third Palestinian state in the heart of our country. We need to make a decision, and my decision is very clear. That land is ours, and no one can occupy his own home. The land of Israel has always been Jewish for thousands of years, will always be Jewish. We will enjoy and host within our country millions of Arabs, 1.8 million Arabs that enjoy full citizenship. But it is a Jewish and democratic country. I want to point out, though, Madi, one more point.
Okay, very briefly.
Hold on.
Very briefly.
Hold on. One more point. There's apartheid, and very severe apartheid, going on in Lebanon and Syria for 50 years, actually for 68 years. The descendants of Palestinian refugees from 1948 have no status there. They're not citizens. They're not even residents.
Yep.
They can't work in the government. Can't become
when
lawyers. Can't
members
buy
of those
a
governments
piece of land.
come on this show,
I would expect.
I asked questions
I
of
would
those governments.
expect.
You're representing Israel. If you really want to talk about apartheid, you know very well that leading South Africans like Desmond Tutu have accused Israel of practicing apartheid. You know that. You brought up the A word, the apartheid word. Desmond Tutu has said when he went to the West Bank, it reminded him of apartheid South Africa. You know that.
I would suggest that we join forces, the Arab world and Israel, to solve the Palestinian refugee problem in the place they live already, in Lebanon,
even though international
in Syria,
law guarantees
in Jordan,
them a right to
all
return.
across the Arab.
Let me ask you this.
And let me point out one more thing, because you seem to be, hold on, no, you mentioned it, I'll point this out. In the 1948 war, 650,000 Jews were kicked out of the Arab countries. But we don't go on whining for 68 years. That we took them into Israel, gave them citizenship.
So Palestinians under occupation are whining.
Why can't the Arabs once and for all take care of their own brothers and sisters? We, the Jews, did it. And we're not looking back 68 years. We solved the problem.
But Palestinians,
I would challenge the Arab rulers.
Naftali,
why don't you take care of the problem?
Okay, that's a good point. You make that point to them. Let me ask you about the actual Palestinians who are living under occupation according to international law and the Israeli Supreme Court. Many would say that you're not a fan of the Palestinians, you're driven by animus towards them. They would point to a quote you made in 2010 to a Palestinian member of the Israeli parliament. You said, when you were still climbing trees, we had a Jewish state here. Isn't that racism, pure and simple, to compare Palestinians to monkeys in trees?
No one is comparing anything. I just do want to be clear that this has been our land for roughly 3,800 years before Islam came to the world. I think that we can achieve peace.
Were Palestinians climbing trees 3,800 years ago?
We respect you, and we respect the Muslim world. We expect, and we don't suggest to divide Mecca or divide Amman, and you should not expect that we divide Jerusalem. It's just not going to happen.
Were Palestinians climbing trees 3,800 years ago, just to clarify your remark?
No, they weren't, but I see a great deal of disrespect. We have our capital of Jerusalem. I see you're very feisty today, and that's okay, you're doing your job. But the way to achieve long-standing peace is to respect each other. I respect our neighbors. The moment they lay down their arms, there will be peace in the Middle East.
One final question before we finish. Do you ever put yourself in the position of a Palestinian? You say you respect Palestinians, suffering on the ground in the West Bank today. Because Ehud Barak, former Israeli Prime Minister, once famously said that if he'd been born a Palestinian, he would have joined a Palestinian militant group. Surely you can get that. Surely if you'd been born a Palestinian and seen your land, your home, your parents, grandparents' home, lived there for decades, being taken away from you against your will to build a settlement, surely you'd be angry about that. Surely you'd see that as an injustice. Do you ever put yourself in their position and see that point of view?
Beyond the endless bunch of lies that you've just stated, I would just say that most of the Arab Muslim world can only envy the status of the Palestinians and the Israeli Arabs. You know, it's
I wasn't talking about Israeli
nice
Arabs.
I
was talking about Palestinians in the West
Muslim
Bank.
World.
Can you put yourself in the position of a Palestinian in the West Bank who has his home taken from him? Just a simple question. Just no politics aside, religion aside, as a human being, can you see how that would make you feel if you had been born a Palestinian in a village in the West Bank and lost your home? It's a very simple question.
So give me, I challenge you now and after the program, give me the name of one Palestinian who was living in a home and had his home taken away from him. That is a flat lie. I challenge you.
There have been hundreds of evictions of families in last year alone.
I want to know whose home.
Last year alone, there have been hundreds of evictions of Palestinians.
Only an illegal building. Also in Israel, if you build illegally, you take your home away.
Naftali Bennett, your government just passed a law to retroactively legalize land.
Give me a name.
Then why did you pass a law to retroactively legalize land you took from the Palestinians?
Don't get all worked up. I'm asking, just give me a name of one family where Jews came and got into their house. That happened in Morocco. It happened in Libya. It happened in Egypt.
We've run out of time. You have no empathy for Palestinian suffering in the West Bank. You have no empathy for Palestinian suffering in the West Bank.
I have a lot of empathy. No. Quite the contrary. I have a lot of empathy. I live side by side with the Palestinians. No one's going anywhere. We're here to stay. They're here to stay. We have to find a way to live together. It's not going to be, though, Mahdi, by coming up with lies. It's going to be by mutual respect. We'll find a way to make peace. It's going to happen.
Naftali Bennett, thanks for joining me on UpFront. Civil war, famine, and warnings of genocide. What's gone wrong in the world's youngest country, South Sudan? 2 years after it gained independence in 2011, a civil war erupted between supporters of the current president and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement and his former vice president. My guest today is the widow of John Garang, the founder of the SPLM, and is considered by many to be the mother of South Sudan. Rebecca Mama Garang fought in the Second Sudanese Civil War and went on to serve in President Salva Kiir's cabinet, but has since become one of his leading critics. She joins me now. Rebecca Garang, thanks for being here on UpFront. Earlier this week, the UN declared a famine in 2 counties of South Sudan, affecting more than 100,000 people. They warned that a further 1 million people in your country are on the brink of famine, and they call this humanitarian catastrophe man-made. Who, in your view, is to blame for it?
Of course, it's the leader, President Salva Kiir, because it's a man-made famine. So anything being done good in the country or bad is always going to the president. So everything, I think, is with our President Salva Kiir Mayardit. He did not, or all of us, as the leaders of South Sudan, we did not lead our people properly. Even salaries of his officials are not being paid. Those who are in the embassies are not being paid because there's no money. And the UN was saying that the estimate was 100,000. It is very little. The estimate is higher than that because there are those who are in the neighboring countries, in Uganda, in Kenya and Ethiopia.
So you have a country where famine is looming for the entire country, millions of people potentially affected. And then you also have a country where the people are not just at risk of starvation. The UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide has warned that it's also a place where there is a potential for genocide. And you've agreed with the UN. You've said that, quote, a genocide is looming. You've said that 64 tribes in your country are at each other's throats.
Yes.
But who are the perpetrators of this genocide, and who will the victims of this genocide be if, God forbid, it happens?
You know, our leaders are using the name of their tribes in order for them to cling to power. So President Salva, because he's from Dinka, he's using the name of Dinka. And his vice president, former vice president, Dr. Riek Machar, is a Nuer. So everything is attributed to Nuer. When they started, the crisis started in 2013. It was the elements in the government of Salva Kiir who are Dinka who killed Nuer. And then now, when the crisis of July 7th started, it is not only the Dinka Nuer, it has engulfed the whole South Sudan.
So what is the solution to this violence? The ceasefire that was signed in August 2015 between President Salva Kiir and his former Vice President Riek Machar, it hasn't really held, has it? No. Even though there's 11,000, I believe, UN troops on the ground in South Sudan. So what do you do? Do you have a new peace process? Do you try recycling a ceasefire? Are you calling for some kind of foreign military intervention?
We are calling for a dialogue where the whole people of South Sudan are brought on the table so that they discuss the issues concerning them, because their government is not doing anything. President Salva called for dialogue. He appointed himself to be the patron of the dialogue when he is a party to the problem.
Are you calling for him to stand down, President Kiir?
Yes. He has to, because if Dr. Riek is not in the equation.
You served as advisor to the president on gender and human rights from 2011 to 2014, or end of 2013. And yet during that period, before the civil war had even broken out, Human Rights Watch reported that government forces were responsible for extrajudicial killings and torture. Some might say, what kind of human rights advisor were you that you couldn't prevent those human rights abuses happening on your watch?
I'm an advisor. I'm supposed to talk on the ears of the president for what I have seen. And I did my role. For 3 years, he didn't listen to you? Is that what you're saying? Nothing. Even appointment is very difficult to get appointment to our president. It's very hard for me to get an appointment. It can go even sometimes to 6 months. Did you at least condemn the human rights abuses by armed forces in your country while you were in government? And I didn't go out publicly, but I talked with the president. And in 2013, I publicly talked about it. I say that the government is killing one tribe. Why? Human rights abuses haven't just happened under President Kiir, though, have they? When your late husband was leader of the Sudan People's Liberation Army, he himself was accused of quite egregious human rights abuses, including the recruitment of child soldiers to fight for him. You were at his side at that time. Did that not bother you? This was a liberation struggle. We were at war. And you know, the war is, the country, South Sudan is very vast. It's a big country. Dr. John tried to command the army. Some small things can happen under his watch, but when he hears about it, he has to do something about it. Human Rights Watch wrote in 1993, prisoners, several thousand refugee children were spirited away from a camp in northern Kenya, almost certainly to serve on Garang's front line. Several thousand refugee children. That's a massive crime against humanity. It was not correct. That's what Human Rights Watch reported in 1993. Human Rights was talking about that, but it was not correct, because I'm there and a mother, and I have my children. So there were no child soldiers fighting in your cause? There are children who went because sometimes they don't go to school. And then when you leave them redundant, they follow the... So better to give them a gun? They follow the army. So better to give them a gun and put them in your armed forces? They were not giving guns, but they were following the army. They were not given guns, but they were child soldiers? They were following the army themselves, because they could not, because there is no school where they were going. Just to be clear, as part of your liberation struggle, did you and your husband recruit child soldiers to fight? No, we didn't. So Human Rights Watch is wrong and other human rights groups? Yes, the children came with their parents, and some of them just follow the army, because sometimes when they go with the army, they can find good, better services of food and things like that. Because we are in the bush, some of the children even leave their parents and they follow the army. So there was no official recruitment which was being done. Okay, well, Human Rights Watch says you forcibly recruited child soldiers. Interestingly, your late husband, John Garang, wanted a new Sudan, but he didn't want an independent South Sudan, as you did. But when you see what's happened in South Sudan since independence in 2011, do you have any regrets? Do you think maybe in hindsight he was right and you were wrong? In the situation where we are in, we listen, as politicians, we listen to the voice of our people. So now what happened is that, according to the agreement, South Sudan succeeded because they think that under a united Sudan, there was no justice. So they wanted to be alone.
No, I understand why you did it, and I understand it had massive popular support. I think 98% of the people voted for it in a referendum. All I'm saying is, in hindsight, 6 years later, you've had civil war, you've had famine, you may, God forbid, have genocide. Do you stop and think, you know what, this whole South Sudanese project, independence, was a mistake?
No, it happened. It happened to a new country. It's not
Not
unique.
every new country goes through civil war, famine, and genocide.
It's not unique in the situation of South Sudan.
There's not many countries.
It's not unique. And what happened is that this is why we wanted to correct this situation. We wanted to correct this situation of what we are doing as the leaders to our own people.
We'll have to leave it there. Rebecca Grang, thank you for joining me on the show. That's our show. Up Front will be back in April.